There is a quiet kind of tiredness that sleep does not touch. It lives beneath functioning, beneath politeness, beneath the practiced ability to say, "I'm fine," while something inside feels permanently drained. The emotionally exhausted adult does not always look broken. They show up, they respond, they keep moving. But each interaction costs more than it should. Each expectation feels heavier than it once did. This exhaustion is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is the residue of years spent regulating emotions alone, carrying responsibilities too early, or holding space for others while neglecting the self. It is the fatigue of being emotionally alert for too long. And eventually, the body and mind begin to whisper what the soul has known for years: something has been depleted. Emotional exhaustion rarely arrives as a dramatic collapse. It enters quietly, so quietly that many do not recognize it as exhaustion at all. It looks like functioning, like answering messages a little slower, like needing more silence after ordinary conversations, like irritation that appears without a clear cause, then disappears just as quickly, leaving guilt behind. The emotionally exhausted adult often continues to perform competence. They meet deadlines. They show up to obligations. They listen to others. From the outside, nothing appears broken. But inside, there is a steady drain, a sense that every emotional interaction requires preparation, that every request feels heavier than it should, that empathy, once natural, now feels like a resource that must be rationed. This is the quiet burnout, the kind that hides beneath responsibility. It often begins with numbness, not emptiness exactly, but a dulling. Joy becomes muted. Sadness beats still exist, but they arrive filtered, as if the system has learned to reduce intensity to survive. People describe it as feeling flat, or off, or not like themselves anymore, but the self is still there. It is simply tired of being constantly engaged. Emotionally exhausted adults frequently minimize what they feel. They tell themselves others have it worse, that they should be grateful, that this is just adulthood. And so the exhaustion is normalized, worn like a badge of maturity, endurance mistaken for strength. Yet the body keeps quiet records. Tension held in the jaw, shallow breathing, a nervous system that rarely settles even during rest. Sleep no longer restores, time off does not replenish, because the exhaustion is not physical, it is relational, emotional, cumulative. It comes from years of managing expectations, from anticipating moods, from regulating environments, from staying emotionally available when no one asked how much it cost. The quiet burnout is especially common among those who were once praised for being easy, mature, or strong. Children who learned early that being low maintenance meant being loved. Adults who became dependable because unpredictability once felt dangerous. Over time, the role becomes an identity, the one who holds it together, the one who listens, the one who copes, and no one notices when coping becomes constant. There is often a moment, small, almost forgettable, when recognition begins. An invitation declined not out of preference, but depletion. A message left unanswered because the emotional energy to respond simply isn't there. A wave of irritation at a harmless question. These moments carry shame, because the exhausted adult does not want to be distant. They simply no longer have access to the emotional fuel they once relied on. This is not a failure of character, it is a signal. Emotional exhaustion is what happens when emotional output consistently exceeds emotional replenishment, when care flows outward without being received inward, when boundaries were never learned, only endurance. Yet recognition is difficult because this exhaustion feels familiar. It has been building slowly, quietly, over years. There was no single breaking point, only accumulation. Many adults reach this stage believing something is wrong with them, that they have become colder, less kind, less capable. But the truth is gentler than that. Nothing has disappeared. It has been overused. The quiet burnout is not an ending. It is the nervous system asking, softly at first, to stop performing survival as a lifestyle. Before healing, before change, before understanding origins, there is this moment of recognition. A moment where exhaustion is finally seen not as weakness, but as evidence of how long someone has been carrying more than their share. And in that recognition, something important begins. Not action, not fixing, but permission to name what has been felt all along. Emotional exhaustion rarely appears out of nowhere. It is seated long before the adult life begins, quietly shaped by the environments in which a child learns to survive. Some adults arrive at fatigue because their early world required constant vigilance, emotional management, and self-regulation beyond their years. In these homes, feelings were often unsafe. Anger, sadness, or disappointment could provoke conflict. Vulnerability sometimes brought criticism, rejection, or neglect. The child quickly learns that safety depends not on expressing needs, but on suppressing them. Adaptation becomes survival. Others experience emotional labor as expectation. They become caretakers for siblings, mediators for parents, or interpreters of moods. They anticipate tension, soften sharp edges, and monitor emotional climates constantly. Even play becomes tactical, strategic smiles, careful words, calibrated responses. Independence is secondary to maintaining harmony. Patterns like these reinforce hyper-vigilance. The nervous system learns to stay alert. Stress hormones rise in anticipation of relational turbulence, even in neutral situations. Attention becomes externally oriented, focused on avoiding conflict rather than exploring curiosity. This constant monitoring carries forward into adulthood, where similar dynamics exist in work, friendships, and intimate relationships. Some childhoods were marked by neglect rather than volatility. The absence of attunement teaches a different lesson: the self cannot rely on others for emotional safety. Needs are postponed. Feelings are internalized. A quiet belief takes hold: I am responsible for managing myself, and perhaps others too. Cultural and familial messages compound the effect. Be strong, don't complain, others have it worse. These phrases, repeated over years, cement endurance as identity. Sensitivity is disguised as weakness. Exhaustion is normalized as maturity. Over time, these adaptations become habits. Adults who were once hyper-aware children often overextend themselves in relationships, workplaces, and social obligations. They give more than they receive. They anticipate more than they ask. They regulate others without pause. Even pleasure can feel conditional. Self-care may feel indulgent or selfish. Rest may be accompanied by guilt or anxiety. The nervous system, trained to prioritize others' emotional survival, struggles to recognize its own needs. Importantly, these childhood origins are not blame, they are context. They are the quiet reasons why some adults arrive at emotional exhaustion without ever having chosen it consciously. They are the inherited patterns, the invisible labor, the early imprints that shape how the adult navigates emotional landscapes. This insight reframes exhaustion. It is not laziness. It is not moral failure. It is the residue of survival strategies that once kept a child safe. Strategies that, when unexamined, become habits that drain a grown person decades later. The emotionally exhausted adult often carries traces of these early lessons in subtle ways: a heightened awareness of others' moods, difficulty asserting needs, the urge to overcompensate to maintain harmony, a pervasive sense that rest is optional and sacrifice inevitable. Understanding origins does not eliminate fatigue, but it clarifies its purpose. Exhaustion is not meaningless. It is the echo of long-term adaptation, a record of resilience, a signal that the strategies which once protected are now unsustainable. And in recognizing the roots, a pathway emerges, not to erase the past, but to understand it, not to blame, but to see clearly where energy has been spent, not to punish oneself, but to begin imagining a life where emotional reserves are replenished rather than depleted. Emotional exhaustion is not only felt, it is measurable. Neuroscience and psychology illuminate why some adults move through life carrying a constant, unseen weight. The mind, body, and nervous system record decades of emotional labor, stress, and adaptation. Chronic stress is central. When the nervous system is repeatedly activated through conflict, obligation, or hyper-vigilance, it shifts into a heightened state of alert. Cortisol and adrenaline remain elevated. Even in rest, the body prepares for impact. The result is fatigue that sleep cannot resolve. Muscles tense, thoughts race, and the capacity for empathy diminishes. The concept of emotional labor helps explain why exhaustion often hides behind competence. Emotional labor is the effort required to manage one's own feelings while regulating the feelings of others. Adults who grew up on guard often perform this labor unconsciously, anticipating moods, smoothing tension, and masking irritation. Over time, the brain treats these efforts as baseline function, leaving little energy for spontaneous joy, curiosity, or self-reflection. Attachment theory provides another lens. Early experiences with caregivers, whether inconsistent, neglectful, or over-demanding, shape adult emotional regulation. Secure attachment allows flexibility in stress and recovery. Insecure or anxious attachment, common in emotionally fatigued adults, creates hypersensitivity to social cues. Even minor tension triggers physiological responses, reinforcing exhaustion. Trauma physiology further complicates the picture. Childhood adversity, neglect, or exposure to chronic family conflict embeds patterns in the nervous system. The amygdala, responsible for threat detection, remains overactive. The prefrontal cortex, which moderates responses, becomes fatigued from continuous regulation. This imbalance manifests as irritability, overwhelm, and difficulty sustaining attention or emotional presence. Sleep and recovery are disrupted. Exhaustion at this stage is not a sign of laziness. It is a system taxed beyond capacity. Cognitive load increases, memory falters, and decision-making becomes effortful. Small tasks require disproportionate energy. Emotions feel heavier. Boundaries feel impossible to maintain. Psychologically, guilt compounds the fatigue. Adults who have long prioritized others' needs may internalize responsibility for their environment, believing rest is indulgent or selfish. Even when aware of the exhaustion, the mind resists reprioritization. This self-imposed pressure keeps energy constantly flowing outward, never replenished inward. Another aspect is empathy depletion. Prolonged caregiving or emotional management diminishes emotional reserves. It is harder to tune into others without strain. Joy, surprise, or wonder may feel muted. The nervous system has adapted to survival, not spontaneity. The interplay of nervous system overload, attachment history, emotional labor, and trauma explains why emotional exhaustion feels so permanent. It also clarifies why interventions that ignore these roots, advice like just relax or think positive, often fail. Rest alone is insufficient. Understanding the systemic nature of fatigue is essential for real recovery. Science also shows that recovery is possible through boundaries, self-compassion, attunement to bodily signals, and gradual emotional pacing. The nervous system can recalibrate, cortisol levels normalize, empathy and energy return. The adult learns to distinguish between genuine obligations and inherited patterns of overextension. Emotional exhaustion is not a personal flaw. It is the cumulative result of decades of adaptation, vigilance, and care for others' emotions at the expense of one's own. Acknowledging it as physiological and psychological reality is the first step toward gentleness, self-trust. For the emotionally exhausted adult, rest is rarely simple. Even when the world slows, the mind often does not. The body longs for relief, but habits, obligations, and guilt resist it. Rest can feel impossible, not because of circumstance alone, but because of an internalized imperative: keep giving, keep managing, keep surviving. Guilt is a constant companion. It whispers that taking time for oneself is selfish. It reminds that others rely on them. It magnifies the consequences of saying no, even when the consequences are imagined. The exhausted adult has learned early that their presence is necessary, and absence, even brief, feels dangerous. Hyper-independence compounds this tension. Adults who grew up responsible for emotions, sometimes their own, sometimes others, internalize the belief that asking for help is weakness. Delegation feels risky. Support feels uncertain. Even when care is offered freely, it may be met with suspicion or anxiety. Will they notice if I need more? Will they let me down? This anticipation of disappointment keeps exhaustion entrenched. There is also the fear of being invisible or inadequate. The emotionally exhausted adult often ties self-worth to performance. Productivity and emotional availability are mistaken for love, value, or competence. To rest is to risk being judged, or to feel unworthy. The mind equates pause with failure. Internalized perfectionism intensifies resistance. Nothing can feel truly complete. Tasks are never fully finished. If one stops to breathe, the list of responsibilities looms, and rest transforms from relief into a source of anxiety. Even leisure activities can become another performance metric. Am I enjoying it enough? Am I doing this right? Sleep, which should restore, often mirrors wakefulness and tension. The mind replays the day's emotional labor, anticipates tomorrow's demands, or ruminates on perceived shortcomings. Rest is experienced as a fragile, temporary suspension, never as a sanctuary. This vigilance reinforces chronic fatigue. Social pressure also contributes. Culture glorifies endurance. Hard work and reliability are praised while emotional boundaries are overlooked. Exhaustion is normalized, even rewarded, as if constant giving signifies moral strength. For many adults, the internalized narrative is, if I rest, I am failing at life, at work, at relationships. Ironically, the act of resisting rest perpetuates the very exhaustion it fears. The nervous system remains overactive, empathy becomes costly, patience thins. The individual may feel trapped in a cycle: push, deplete, survive, repeat. The conflict is deeply emotional. Part of them craves stillness and safety. Another part believes stillness is unacceptable. The tug of war creates tension not only in thought but in body: tension, headaches, muscle stiffness, shallow breathing, fatigue that is both mental and physical. Understanding this dynamic reframes the struggle. It is not laziness, selfishness, or weakness. It is a learned response from years of hyper-vigilance, early responsibility, and unrelenting caregiving. Resistance to rest is evidence of a system conditioned to survive, not to recover. True relief requires acknowledging this tension without judgment. It involves noticing that resistance is not failure, but adaptation. It means creating space, physically, emotionally, psychologically, for rest without shame. And it means realizing that self-care is not optional, it is essential to functioning at all. The emotionally exhausted adult learns slowly that rest is not indulgence. It is reclamation. It is the first step in reversing decades of cumulative fatigue. This inner conflict, guilt versus need, vigilance versus safety, is uncomfortable yet necessary. It marks the threshold between surviving and living, and only by crossing it can the path toward renewal begin. For many emotionally exhausted adults, the turning point is subtle. It rarely arrives as a dramatic collapse. Instead, it appears as a quiet recognition: I cannot keep going like this. A realization that has been gestating for years finally rises to the surface. This moment can emerge during routine life. A task that once felt manageable suddenly feels insurmountable. A conversation triggers disproportionate frustration. A minor disappointment triggers tears, irritability, or withdrawal. These are not signs of weakness, they are signals of cumulative overload finally demanding acknowledgement. The realization often carries guilt alongside relief. Guilt that they have neglected others' expectations. Guilt for feeling incapable of performing as they once did. But relief begins to seep in as well, a relief that survival is no longer a silent, unending performance. The mind and body, exhausted from years of caretaking, begin to recognize the necessity of change. At this turning point, clarity arrives about boundaries and limits. For the first time, it becomes evident that exhaustion is not a personal flaw, but a consequence of sustained emotional overextension. The adult sees that saying no, resting, or prioritizing self-care is not betrayal, it is preservation. They begin to perceive the difference between obligation imposed by others and the obligations that truly matter to themselves. Physiologically, the body confirms this awakening. Muscle tension may soften. Breathing may deepen. Sleep may begin to feel restorative, even slightly, for the first time in years. The nervous system recognizes that there is permission to step back, to slow down, to cease constant regulation of others' emotions. Emotionally, the adult confronts grief for lost energy, grief for opportunities missed while carrying burdens, grief for parts of themselves they neglected in service to others. This grief is necessary. It marks acknowledgement of what has been endured, validating the depth of exhaustion and the sacrifices made. Often, there is an accompanying fear of judgment for no longer performing at the relentless pace demanded by life work or relationships. Fear that rest will be seen as selfish or that others will feel abandoned. Fear that slowing down may reveal inadequacies long masked by overextension. Yet within this fear exists insight, the alternative. Continuing to ignore one's limits carries far greater cost. This turning point is both ending and beginning. It ends the illusion that endurance equals worth. It begins the process of attending to the self with intention rather than obligation. It marks a shift from surviving to living. The adult may not yet know how to recover, but the seed of possibility is planted. They begin to notice what has been missing: quiet, replenishment, presence, and alignment between internal needs and external actions. This awareness is the first step towards sustainable emotional balance. It is also profoundly human. No one arrives here unscathed. Years of adaptation, responsibility, and caretaking shape the nervous system, habits, and identity. Breaking the cycle requires courage, reflection, and patience. It is not about instant transformation. It is about recognition, honesty, and the first breaths of relief. The moment something breaks is not a moment of failure. It is a turning point of awakening, a recognition that the life they have been living, constant vigilance, unrelenting empathy, endless endurance, is not the only way to exist. And from this recognition begins the possibility of a life lived with energy, presence, and a gentleness toward oneself that was long denied. After the turning point comes a new, unfamiliar rhythm, a life no longer dictated by constant vigilance. For the emotionally exhausted adult, this phase is not dramatic. It is gentle and even, and often invisible from the outside. Healing begins with small acts of self-recognition, pausing before responding, allowing silence without guilt, saying no to obligations that drain rather than nourish. Each choice, however subtle, signals the nervous system that safety is possible. Boundaries become teachers. They are not walls, but structures of care. Boundaries clarify where responsibility ends and self-preservation begins. This is radical for someone who spent years absorbing others' needs as their own. Learning to honor limits can feel uncomfortable, even selfish at first, but the body gradually learns that protection does not equate to harm. Self-compassion becomes central. Exhausted adults often internalized criticism for emotions, for rest, for imperfections. Now the practice is to treat themselves as they would a friend, patiently, gently, without judgment. Grief for past overextension is acknowledged, not suppressed. Mistakes are reframed as lessons, not proofs of inadequacy. Rebuilding emotional capacity requires attunement to internal signals. Noticing tension, fatigue, or irritability early allows adjustment before depletion escalates. Recognizing emotional limits is a radical departure from years of ignoring needs. It teaches that emotional energy is finite and that honoring it is both necessary and natural. Relationships shift. Some connections dissolve under the weight of honesty and new boundaries. Others deepen, nourished by mutual respect and understanding. The adult learns to engage with presence rather than performance, offering care without forfeiting selfhood. This recalibration restores the possibility of genuine empathy, rather than the strained, obligatory empathy that once defined their life. Pleasure and spontaneity return in small doses. Moments once taken for granted, quiet mornings, laughter without agenda, curiosity-driven exploration, become opportunities for restoration. The nervous system gradually learns that joy is not dangerous, that emotional expression does not necessitate cost. Integration is gradual. It is not linear. Some days exhaustion returns, triggered by old patterns or external pressures. But awareness now exists. This is a signal, not a verdict. The adult can respond, adjust, and recover, rather than perpetually overextend. There is also reconciliation with the past, not through forgetting, but through understanding. Childhood adaptation strategies are recognized as necessary then, rather than flaws now. The adult acknowledges their endurance as resilience, not weakness. This reframing transforms the narrative from self-criticism to validation. Healing in this phase is embodied. The body, long accustomed to tension, begins to relax, breathing deepens, muscles soften, sleep becomes restorative. The nervous system experiences, perhaps for the first time in years, relief without guilt. Learning to soften again does not mean the exhaustion disappears. It means the adult responds differently. They recognize depletion early. They honor themselves when tired. They cultivate energy gradually, sustainably, and with intention. In these quiet acts, a profound transformation occurs. Not dramatic, not perfect, but steady. The emotionally exhausted adult begins to inhabit their life fully, present, attentive, and gentle with themselves. This stage is a testament to resilience, not a reward for suffering. It is proof that even after decades of relentless caregiving, vigilance, and adaptation, the human system can recover. And through patience, boundaries, and self-compassion, the adult begins to live, not just survive. Eventually, a new rhythm emerges. Not loud, not triumphant, quiet, measured, grounded. A life lived with space for rest, for reflection, for simply being. For the emotionally exhausted adult, this space is unfamiliar at first. Silence may feel strange, stillness may feel risky, presence without obligation may feel impossible. But slowly, the nervous system begins to recognize it as safety. In this space, emotions are no longer rationed. Joy can be felt fully. Sadness can arrive without judgment. Frustration can be acknowledged rather than suppressed. The adult discovers that feelings do not always demand action. They demand acknowledgement. Connection is redefined. Relationships are no longer measured by endurance or emotional labor. They are measured by reciprocity, safety, and mutual respect. The adult engages with others consciously, choosing presence rather than performing care. Boundaries, once feared, become markers of trust in oneself. Grief is honored without shame. For decades, energy was spent sustaining others, smoothing tension, and surviving relational demands. Now, grief can exist alongside relief. Loss can be acknowledged without guilt. Pain can coexist with calm. This is the freedom of space, freedom to feel without carrying the world. Time itself transforms. Minutes once filled with obligation are now opportunities for restoration. Tasks are approached with presence rather than obligation. Even work is experienced differently, attentive, intentional, not at the cost of emotional depletion. The adult begins to understand that life need not be a constant ledger of giving and sacrifice. There is also clarity about self-worth. It is no longer tied to performance, caregiving, or endurance. Value is inherent. Rest is deserved. Emotion is a resource, not a debt. The adult learns to inhabit their own life fully, without apology. Space also allows curiosity to re-emerge. Hobbies, interests, and pleasures return not as obligations, but as invitations to experience. The nervous system gradually learns that safety includes joy, spontaneity, and laughter. Energy once hoarded now circulates freely. This life with space is neither perfect nor linear. Fatigue may still surface. Old patterns may tempt return to overextension. But with awareness and compassion, the adult navigates these moments without returning to self-betrayal. The nervous system, once constantly on alert, now rests with possibility rather than fear. The poetic truth of this stage is subtle. Freedom is not found in control. Relief is not found in perfection. Belonging is not found in fulfilling every expectation. They are found in presence, in permission, in gentleness toward oneself. For the emotionally exhausted adult, this life with space is revolutionary. It is a reclamation of what was lost, a rewriting of a long history of overextension. It is a life where boundaries protect rather than alienate, where rest restores rather than shames, where emotional presence is sustainable rather than costly. And in this quiet reclamation, there is peace, a life felt fully. Breathing without strain, loving without depletion, living without the weight of constant vigilance. This is the final chapter, not because exhaustion disappears, but because the adult learns to move with it, to honor limits, to choose presence over performance, to live with space, and through that space, finally find themselves whole.